Well, I've got the clamps on the gear and I've got them positioned in what appears to be the correct spot. And you can see my gear has got a substantial gap underneath here. It's about, it's going to end up being about 8 millimeters from the bottom of the fuselage to here. If you look underneath the edge here, you can see the gap that I have here between the bottom of the clamp and the side of the fuselage. Now, I'm going to get this probably another millimeter lower. You can see where the corner here of this bracket is about ready to hit this doubler plate that goes over here. So what I'm going to try and do on the inside here is come in here with a file and just file down the corner of that a little bit more just to round this off, because I think I can get this down just a little bit further. But this is where they're supposed to be basically, even for the fiberglass gear. It should be a little bit lower than this. Like I said, it should just clear those rivets. And looking at the alignment here with the brackets, you can see I'm right on the edge of the opening of the wing spars. And then on the other side, I'm centered right now on the hole that I have that needs to be widened eventually and lengthened for the wing pin that goes in the back here. So I think what I'm going to do is just go ahead and start drilling this. I don't see any reason not to. These brackets are identical on both sides, and as long as I align the front one here and align the rear one with the hole, I should be sure that I'm at least, you know, square with the fuselage on both sides. So I think that's what I'm going to do, is start seeing if I can get this attached. Well, I drilled my first 2 holes here and flipped the fuselage right side up so I could check inside and see where those holes were ending up as far as corresponding to frame 4 here that it's going to be attached to. And I've got a couple issues here. So those holes come through, and I think you can see them right there. Now I've got them a little bit too close to frame 4. They're a little too far forward, but because I just drilled 16-inch holes, I can move them aft enough to get it a little bit more centered in frame 4 and give myself a little bit of clearance there. But that top hole is supposed to align, apparently, with that notch that's cut out in the wing pin plate that's there, and it's actually a little bit low. I can't really raise it up on this side, because otherwise my brackets for the landing gear will hit the fuselage, and I certainly don't want to get them too close. I'm going to come over here and grab this one here. Now, I've made these properly. I went back and remeasured these to make sure that the center of this hole lines up with the top. I've got the right distance here. I've got these holes in the right spot. So these holes are all in the right spot. But according to this, where I've drilled these holes, this is a little bit low, and I really should be raising it up a little bit more. Now, I really can't raise it up much more, like I said, or I'm going to start hitting underneath here. So I'm going to have to play around with this a little bit more and see what I need to adjust to get these 2 holes to line up. You know, there's a possibility, I mean, even with this nut down in here, even with the small nut, it fits. You know, it does fit in that little hole there, but just barely. It certainly doesn't go low enough to get down to where my bolt's coming through. It's close though, so I may have to actually get a Dremel tool in here or something and just edge just get on the edge of that plate there a little bit, just to notch it out a tiny bit more, a little bit lower, to make sure this will fit. But this is all very, very, very tight. So I'm going to keep working on this, see if I can get this first plate mounted in the right spot. And I'll show you what I end up with here in the end. I took the washer out of here and moved it to the front here just to move this bracket in a little bit more. That's just to make sure that I stay centered on the back here with the hole I already have here and centered on frame 5. And so if I hold this here now, you can see I've got a little bit of a gap here between the plate now and the spar box, which is fine, and I'm right on the edge of where I've already drilled my holes. So I can move those holes over a little bit, which I think will be good. I'm going to go ahead and try and leave it at this point. And then what I am going to try and do is I'm hitting here on the corner, I still have a little bit of gap here, but that means that I can trim a little bit more or shave down on that doubler plate a little bit more on that corner to get this to come down a little bit more. And then what I'll do is I will move these holes down a little bit. So I'm going to kind of put those holes like that. I'm already stuck with wherever I drilled these already. I can't really go outside of where those holes are. So I'm going to try and put this bracket basically right there. And I think that'll work. What I can do with this washer here is this washer is a little bit thick anyway, so I'll put a thinner washer here which will push that back. I'll put a thinner washer here which will push this forward a little bit. And then because I know I'm centered on this hole, this should be centered on frame 5. So I should be good there. It's just a matter of getting this fixed and positioned in the right spot. So I'm going to try and drill these holes right there and see what I end up with. I thought of something here when I go to fix this. What I'm going to do instead of finishing drilling these holes is I'm going to drill these other 2 holes here and get some bolts in here so that this thing won't move at all. And then while I've got this aligned with the edge of the holes I've already drilled in, I'm just going to use this steel plate as a guide for my drill bit to go through so I can get through the aluminum without that hole walking around. You know, since I already have that, the only option I have other than that is to try and walk that hole over to the center, which I just don't want to mess with doing that right now. So I'm going to drill these 2 holes, get some bolts in here to hold this in here. Then I'll come back and drill these out, and I should be good at that point. I've got the right side fuselage brackets drilled in. They look pretty good. I've got to flip it over though and check the inside. But one thing I would suggest when you're working on any of the fuselage stuff is it's handy to just go to the hardware store and pick up some number 8 and some number 10 screws, nuts, and washers so that you don't have to deal with trying to use your aircraft hardware and also deal with the lock nuts. I've been always stacking up washers on behind here, but now I'm going to run to the store and go get some number 8 bolts just to hold all this together as I'm just fitting everything in place. But you can see underneath here I've got very slight gap above those rivets there with the fitting here. I am hitting on this corner, which is fine. Like I said, I'm just going to file off the end of that doubler there, and I also can do a little bit more rounding on the edges of the clamps here. But I'm going to try and position the other side in exactly the same spot. You can see the slight gap I ended up with here on the edge just to get this away from, you know, the side of frame 4 there, just to give myself a little bit more clearance. But this looks like it's going to work. I'm pretty happy with this. I do need to go back and just get some thinner washers here to put on either side just to finish getting the clamps here in the right spot. But yeah, this is looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and try and do the exact same thing on the other side, and then I'll try and flip this over. So I've got both sides drilled now for the brackets that hold the clamps for the landing gear leg. I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually pull the landing gear bow off. What I can do is just unbolt these here. I'm going to take the leg off and then put the clamp back on here and then flip it over and see exactly how everything's fitting and how everything looks as far as the holes lining up. And what I'm going to do is go get some temporary hardware at the hardware store so that I can bolt all this together with complete bolts and washers and everything, just to have this so that I can have it upright and actually use the gear now. So like I said, I'm also gonna, when I take this apart, go ahead and just file down and round off that corner a little bit on that bracket there. But otherwise, the gear is pretty much attached at this point, or can be attached at this point. So now it's just a matter of getting the hardware installed. And the other thing I have to do that I haven't done yet is I have to cut out the shims that are supposed to go not only on the back side of these but also on the front side of these before I permanently attach all of this. And again, I'm not sure I'm going to permanently attach any of this right now. I do have to take these off and paint them. You know, depending on what we do with the airplane as far as painting and finishing it, this all might need to come off again too. So I'm not exactly sure at this point how permanent I am going to attach this. I really don't like to wear out the lock nuts if I don't have to, but I'm going to keep working on this, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get it right side up and we can actually look at the holes from the other side and see how things lined up. And you can see the holes that were drilled in for the landing gear mounts. There is no room for error on these at all. I've got mine spaced really well on either side of the frame here, but as you can see, those holes are fairly close to the inside radius of that vertical part of frame 5. If I had been, a millimeter this way, I wouldn't have probably been able to get a nut on there. I'm not really going to be able to get a washer on any of these either. The most I could do is take a washer and maybe grind off one side of it to put it in there, which actually isn't too bad of an idea because we've got this radius inside of here for where this frame is bent. Taking a washer and making it fit in here and just grinding off the edge until it fit flush against that frame, and then rounding the bottom edge that touches this just to give you that little radius there. You don't really want to tighten a nut on here and actually end up with that nut hitting that radius in there and damaging that radius in any way, because that's where you're going to end up with a crack. So I might do that with this. I might put a washer in there and just kind of trim that washer to fit in there and radius it so it makes a nice edge there with the frame. But I still got an issue here with this top one here. This is going to be really tight getting it in there, and I may have to do a little bit of grinding away at that plate there for the pin plate, just a little bit, just to get it so I can get a nut inside of there. The rest of these should be fairly easy to get to, but yeah, this looks good. I mean, this is as good as it can get. So anyway, I'm gonna go pick up my my bolts that I need from the hardware store just to put all this back together temporarily, and I'm gonna get those shims cut. In fact, I might cut the shims first so that I can put this all back together with the shims in place that need to be there. And then we'll get the gear on and we'll see what it looks like with it on the ground. So I cut out all these 40 thousandths shims that we're supposed to use with these landing gear brackets. These are actually made out of aluminum, and I originally bought a piece of 40 thousandths steel, assuming that these were steel because of the steel brackets here, but these are supposed to be aluminum. Half of these are different. Half of these are matched to the profile of the rear bracket, which is this one, and the other half are matching the front bracket, which is this one. So I'm going to go ahead and assemble the gear now on the fuselage and just get this on its wheels. I'm just going to use temporary screws that I picked up at the local home store, and I'm just going to get everything bolted together and just make sure that everything fits and everything looks good. Once I know everything fits and looks good and is exactly how I want it, I'll pull all this apart. I'll get these steel brackets painted. I'll get these shims alodined. We'll get the final finishing done on the actual clamps, and we'll get everything ready then to actually assemble this in final form. And I think what I'm going to do is, once I get all that done, I am just going to assemble it. I'll put the real nuts and bolts on there, and we'll just assume it's not going to come off. So I'm going to start assembling these on right now, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get the fuselage on its gear. Before I flip this over, I did want to show you I got the brackets now installed with the shims on top and my temporary screws. I was able to get all the bolts in without a problem, except for these top ones here, which are hitting that pin plate for the wing spars, as you can see down there. The nuts on the rest of these just fit right between the frame and the hole. Basically the flat side of the nut just fit right up against it, and that's pretty much the way they are all the way around. Like I said, again, I have the same issue over here where this bolt is not lined up perfectly centered on that little notch that is there for the pin plate. So I'm gonna have to do a little bit of tiny bit of grinding in there to make sure that I can get a nut inside that area. It's very close because the gap here between this plate and the side here is almost allows this nut to fit in there, regardless of whether that space is there or not. But I need to either way put a little bit, grind a little bit away from there to make sure that that fits. Okay, so I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to go ahead and mount the brackets in here and get the gear on, and then I'll set this thing on the floor. Well, it's officially on the ground and on its gear. It looks really good. The only thing I am noticing is that the either the main gear is a little bit too tall, honestly, or the nose gear is a bit too short. Now, I know the nose gear isn't short. It's made according to the plans. The only thing I will say is that the tube that I'm using, because I didn't want to waste extra material, I bought 4130 tubing and bought it in a foot length, and so it's about a 1/4 inch shorter. However, the bracket that we're using in here as our clamp mechanism on the front is shorter also, which moves the spring point a little bit higher. So I've actually got probably more travel on the nose gear than the standard plans configuration. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's at enough of an angle here that even putting weight in the airplane and you know, putting the gear down a little bit further just because of the spring force isn't going to change the angle of this as much as I'm probably going to want. Now, here's what's interesting about the Grove gear is that if you look down here, there's a fairly large flat plate area back here where the axle is. I could cut off the bottom of this probably an inch, basically to the top of the 5/8 axle hole, and re-drill the axle hole a little bit higher and do the 4 bolts, you know, myself. I might actually do that because I really don't like the fact that the way this is sitting right now, it's a little bit too high here, and I don't really want to extend the nose gear any further because there's only so much travel we have inside the nose here to begin with. But yeah, I'm actually quite surprised at this because I made this gear according to what I know other people have done for the landing gear, which is I believe 10.5 inches from basically the top of the gear leg down to the center of the axle. And if I'll have to go back and look at the plans again just to see if there's any dimensions on the fiberglass gear that might make a difference. But it does look like the main gear should be lowered almost an inch to make this work out. But you know, luckily with the aluminum gear here, I do have the ability to adjust that quite a bit, and I think it'll be just fine. But that's something I'm going to look at in the future here. When I get a little bit closer, I do want to, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to put the tail on it next or what, but I might put some weight in this just to see how much this gear actually will spring down and if it makes sense to keep it like this or actually make it lower. But I am surprised that it's sitting as high as it is. I've got to double check some of the dimensions that I have, although I don't see much in the plans as far as, you know, what the actual distance should be from this axle to the fuselage or the top of the gear. Now, I went by what I know other people have used for the Grove gear when they ordered it, which was 10.5 inches from the center of the axle to the top of the gear. Now, I've got another probably 8 millimeters taller, or that, you know, I'm pushing this gear out even more just because I can't put this gear flat onto the fuselage. But I think what I'm going to do is, as you can see, I've got a really nice flat plate area all the way down to about here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this axle and I'm going to move it as far up as I can go before I get to any of the bend. And I'm going to re-drill the axle hole and re-drill the 4 bolt holes for the axles on both sides so that I can get this a little bit lower. And I think that's going to make a significant amount of difference because I can probably move that axle, I mean, probably almost up to 2 inches. I don't know that I want to go that far, but I'm definitely going to move it. I'm definitely going to move it at least an inch. In fact, I'd almost like to go as low as I can because I'd rather have a little bit more travel on this up here on the front and have this a little bit lower than to have the situation I have right now where I've got it very, very tail high. So what I'll do is I'll figure out this configuration again for the Grove gear and just make a recommendation if anybody else wants to order this gear and use it on a CriCri. It definitely needs to be shorter than what is recommended or what has been ordered in the past, at least in my opinion. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start modifying this gear leg and move these axles up, but I did want to go back and do some measurements on this to see not only what the configuration is now compared to what I ordered, but also see what the configuration of this, at least distance from the top of the gear to the ground, and how much it changes with the gross weight on it. I didn't really check that. I was more looking to see that the axles were, parallel with the ground when we put gross weight on it, to know that the spring was essentially the right amount of spring for this gear and this configuration on the CriCri. So I went back and started checking some of these measurements. Now, when I ordered this gear, I ordered it 39 inches wide, and in the diagram that it shows to measure the gear, it's supposed to be in this configuration, without any weight on it. So I did 39 inches from outside to outside here. This is actually 39.5 inches wide. And then for the distance from the top here of the gear down to the center of the axle was supposed to be 10 inches. Now I'm actually right at, I think it's 10 3/4. Yeah, I'm actually at 10 3/4 to the center. It's even a little bit more. It might be a 1/16 more than that. So I'm already more than 3/4 of an inch taller on this than I had planned. Plus, we've got another, 1/4 inch of distance here at the top between the bottom of the fuselage here. So we're already an inch taller in this configuration than I had planned to be with the original dimensions that I had. Now, it only appears that I can move this about 1 5/16 of an inch up to be able to, make it so that the axle plate that mounts on the backside of here isn't hitting the radius, and that we're, making sure that we're putting that on the flat part. And what that allows me to do is I can basically just cut this gear leg off right at the top of these upper mounting bolt holes, so I can get a nice, straight edge and clean cut across here, and then mount the axle from there up. But that's only going to gain me, 1 5/16 of an inch. Which I'm hoping is enough. There's nothing else I can do after that. And of course, at least that gets it closer to where I had expected this gear leg to be when I ordered it. So I'm going to go ahead and put the axles back on here. I'm going to set up my little rig that I had before that I put the weight on it. I'm going to measure the distance from the top of the gear to the ground with no weight on it, and then I'm going to go ahead and compress it with the 400 pounds at gross weight and just see how much lower this gets. I can't imagine it's going to move. It might move an inch. I'm not sure it's going to move any more than that. Now, I am going to get some compression on these tires, so the tires are going to flex. It'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I still feel like I need to get this gear as low as possible, which I only have so much adjustment here. I can't do anything else. And if I have to, I'll have to get maybe a slightly longer nose gear if I find out that this isn't quite enough to get this airplane level when it's on the ground. So let me start working on this, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little closer to figuring out what's going on here. Well, I've reset up my precision landing gear test rig to try and do some measurements here. So if we look at this right now, from the top of the gear leg down to the ground, we're at exactly 15.5 inches with, no weight other than the lightweight 2x4s that are holding this up. So what I'm going to do is, I don't have my precision digital scale here today. My wife wanted that back in the bathroom. So I do remember what I put for weight on the front here, though, so I'm going to go ahead and load this up with everything I had on it before to simulate the gross weight at about 400 pounds. So I'm going to put that on there, and then we'll retake that measurement there. The other thing I'm going to check too is I'm going to measure underneath the gear leg here to the ground, just to see how much that distance changes, which will tell me how much the tires are actually being compressed. I believe I have 30 psi in each one of these tires right now. So let me go ahead and set this up, and we'll take some more measurements. Okay, I've got all the weight placed on the front here, and I think we're down to 14.25. So we went from 15.5 to 14.25, so that's an 1.25 inch drop with gross weight on it. So we have to assume then the airplane would drop that equal amount on the main gear. So let me, I'm gonna have to go do some calculations on the actual nose gear extension and figure out where level is with the nose gear all the way out at full extension to see where this should be when we're both at, or when we're at, basically empty weight on the airplane. So I noticed when I went to put these axles back on here, because I took them off yesterday, that this cheapo hardware store hardware that I got from Lowe's, Home Depot, that type of place, these bolts are actually stripping with gross weight on these axles. So you can see how important it is to have good quality hardware, because this is not. I don't know what the strength of this is compared to, say, aircraft hardware, but I thought it was interesting to know that just putting gross weight on this was enough to start deforming these threads. In fact, the bottom bolts on both sides are a bit hard to get off. So anyway, just thought I'd show you that. This bolt on this side completely stripped out. So I've decided to just go ahead and modify this gear leg and move this axle. I haven't gone through the process of calculating now based on the figures that I have to determine, okay, what is level at gross weight of the airplane with the main gear compressed and the nose gear in the position it's going to be. But the problem is I don't really know where the nose gear is going to be, because I don't know exactly how much weight is supposed to be on the nose gear and how much the nose gear is going to be compressed at that gross weight. So I just know for now, based on where this is at, this is off. I have to lower this, and I really only have one option for lowering this, because I could put these bottom holes here and align those up with the top holes and then cut it off. So instead of the gear axle being here, I could put it up here and align these holes. The problem is, as you can see, the center hole actually protrudes into the area that the axle is going to be, so I'm going to end up with a cutout at the bottom of my gear leg, which I really don't want. So the only other option above that is to line up the bottom edge of this axle with the top edge of the hole, so that I can cut this gear off and get a clean, a completely flat bottom section to the bottom of this gear. Now, I have just enough room, it appears, to do that. So if I put this here, if I were to cut the gear leg off, the curve starts right above there. So I literally just have enough space to just make this work, to get this axle moved from here up to here and still have the bottom of the gear leg cut off flat. That's what I'm going to do. I think that's the best solution. That still only gets me that 1 5/16 of an inch shorter. It's the maximum I can go here. And I still don't think that's going to be too short at all. In fact, I still think this gear leg is going to be too long, especially with how stiff it is. It just doesn't flex enough, even at empty weight of the airplane and all the way to gross weight of the airplane. I actually found out that even though we had an inch and a quarter of travel, between the top of the gear leg and the ground here, between completely empty with nothing on it, not even the weight of the airplane, all the way up to gross weight. But when I went back and calculated from the base here and how much this changed to the ground, 3/4 of an inch of that inch and a quarter was actually compression of the tire itself. So that only meant that the gear itself springing out only moved up to 1/2 inch, and that was it. And that kind of makes sense, actually. Now, we also have to remember that when the airplane's completed, it's going to weigh 175, 180 pounds, somewhere around there. So it's going to have that much weight on here without me in it or gas in it. And so it's going to only flex between that, that middle range of 180 pounds up to 400 pounds. With me being in it compared to empty, whereas we were testing here from completely, we've got maybe 10 pounds of 2x4s here on it, and that's it. So there's, again, a lot of calculations I think that have to be done here to figure out, well, even at empty weight, this is going to be sprung a little bit, this is going to come out a little bit, it's going to be a little bit lower, but it's still not going to be more than probably 1/4 inch of travel of this, if even that. And let's assume it is 1/4 inch, and then let's say that the tire is compressed 3/8 of an inch. So again, I'm not going to worry about it until after I get this axle refit in here. We'll go ahead and put the gear back on. We'll check it again. I'll go back and do all the measurements again, from the CAD perspective, just to see what the ideal horizontal position is for the airplane compared to the gear, at empty weight and gross weight. And at least that will help us determine, should we even be getting a gear leg that's shorter than this? If we go with aluminum, maybe we need to go with 9 inch. Maybe we need 8.5. I'm not really sure. I was a little bit surprised that this was off from what I had actually ordered. Since I ordered 10 inches, this came in its unsprung position at 10 3/4 and not 10. And even when it's compressed, it's at 10 1/4 then, theoretically, assuming the gear only moved 1/2 inch. So a lot of things to figure out here. but at least I'll be closer with the modification I'm going to do here. I thought I'd show you what it looks like. I went ahead and drilled the holes out and just moved everything up exactly 1 3/8 of an inch. I seem to have enough room for that. I am taking a finishing bit and just going across the top here and resurfacing both sides just to make sure that I have a perfectly flat surface. I do have a little bit of thickness on material here that I have extra. I think this is like 0.645 or 0.648 thick, and of course 0.625 is 5/8 of an inch, which is what it's supposed to be. So I'm just getting the corner up here just a little bit because it does start to curve a little bit up at the top, but just barely on the inside. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off now and surface it, and then I should be done. Well, here's the landing gear after I cut the ends of it off and re-drilled the holes on the end here. This turned out really nice. I like the looks of it better now that these legs are a little bit shorter. I think it's gonna work just fine, but let me lay this down here. I'll just do a measurement real quickly. So let me find a tape measure, hold on. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna measure from the end of here to the center of the hole, and it looks like I'm right at 9 3/8. So 9 3/8 down to the center of the axle hole. Down to the very bottom of the gear is about 10 3/16, it looks like. So yeah, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put this back on the airplane, mount it back on there, put the fuselage back on the ground, and I'm just gonna see if I can adjust the nose gear to where the furthest extension is supposed to be, according to the plans, and then just check and see how level the fuselage is. I want to try and get pretty close to level at that point. Obviously, if I'm sitting in the airplane or it's at gross weight, the main gear is going to sag down, but also the nose gear is going to go down too. So as long as the sitting stance is fairly level at full extension of both the nose gear and the main gear, I'll be happy with that. So let me put this back together and we'll see what it looks like. All right, so this is the fuselage back on the ground again with the slightly shortened gear. It's much closer to level now, although it's still off. You can see the bubble here where it's at. So what I've done is I've put a block up here in the front, measured up exactly the same amount that the rear part of the level is here from the center of the fuselage, and just put a level across there. It still is nose low. In fact, it's about, I think it's about an inch nose low. In other words, if I raise this up until I get that bubble in the center, there's about an inch gap under here. So I mean, we're closer to level, but we're still not level, and that's with the nose gear positioned with 85 millimeters between the lower shock mount and the upper shock mount, which is supposed to be, according to the plans here, I think it's 102. Hold on. Yeah, in the relaxed state, the distance between the upper and lower shock mount should be about 102 millimeters. So, you know, I'm 17 millimeters, which I guess is about 3/4 of an inch even lower up here in the front, or with the nose gear extended that much further than it probably should be. So I'm not sure. Obviously, I can't go any lower with the setup that I have here. I'm just going to have to deal with it. I may have to do a slightly longer nose gear in order to compensate for that. I could also put a block underneath the fork, between the fork and the steel plate there to extend it. I could also make a longer fork. Lots of things I can do to make this you know, more level if I need to. Now, there's really no weight on this. There's not 175 pounds of empty weight on this right now. I don't have the tail on it. I don't have any of the controls in it. So that's going to settle it down a little bit more, but it is something I'm going to have to watch during the build when I get closer to the end and see where I'm at and how this thing looks. But for now, I'm going to keep moving ahead. All right, so we're going to move on to the next thing on the landing gear assembly. What we're going to do next is start to make the angles that are going to go on either side of the gear leg on the bottom of the fuselage. And the purpose of this angle that is going to be installed here is to support a bolt that is going to go through the center of the gear here and actually prevent the gear from moving side to side. We're going to put an angle on this side, a bolt through this, and also a bolt through the landing gear, but it's going to be at a hinge point, so that as this gear is allowed to flex when you land, because it's going to flex between this bracket and the other bracket there in the center here, it's going to go up and down like this. It's going to rotate around a mounted bracket here, but it's going to prevent the gear from moving side to side, and it's going to keep the gear centered on the center of the fuselage, so that as it flexes, the forces here that are being applied from this bracket through to these fittings here and to the side of the fuselage is completely perpendicular to the ground. So it's going to be allowed to flex but not move side to side, and it's one of the reasons why these steel plates here, they're actually fairly thin. If we didn't have this installed in the middle and prevented the gear from moving side to side, any side load on the tire here could push the gear over and flex it sideways like this, and cause these brackets and these clamps here to hit the side of the fuselage. So it's kind of an ingenious way of doing this gear. I've never seen another experimental aircraft that has as complex of a gear assembly as this does, with all these bushings and rotating brackets and clamps and all of this. Typically you'll just have a gear leg like this and you'll literally just bolt it to the bottom of the fuselage. There'll sometimes be some rubber in between it, but that's about it. But you do notice that a lot of home-built aircraft do have issues where there's cracking and all kinds of structural issues and structural failures around the gear attach points. So the way that the designer has spent the extra time to actually design a very sophisticated gear assembly here that allows for completely controlling side loads and completely controlling your up and down loads upon landing is quite amazing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut some of these angles. I've got to put one on each side. It needs to go between this support here in the fuselage and this one here, and you'll actually see I have rivets installed in the wrong place here, and I mentioned this when I riveted the fuselage together. You can see the hole underneath here. There's a rivet that I didn't put in there, and I accidentally put one in here. This is where a bolt's supposed to go to hold the angle that's on this side of the gear. There's supposed to be a bolt here, and there's supposed to be a bolt over here, and I did the same thing on the rear. I just miscounted the rivets back from here when I was installing them, because I pre-drilled them, but I didn't intend to install a rivet there. So I've got a rivet that needs to go here where this hole is, and then this one I need to drill out because this is where the angle goes across the back of the landing gear. So I'm going to try and get these holes drilled out. I'm going to get these angles cut to fit in here, and we'll start fitting these in and start aligning the holes so that we can start preparing those for installing bolts. So let me get the angles cut and fit, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're done. I got the first couple steps done on these supports for the gear. I went ahead and cut these to the right length. I cut them to 12 millimeters wide, which is what they're supposed to be here at the base. And then I drilled the holes on the ends to match where the rivet holes were already in the fuselage. And then I evenly spaced 2 holes in between. Now, all of these holes here are supposed to get a 3 millimeter bolt, or, you know, converting it, it's a number 6 bolt, which is tiny. Tiny bolts that are supposed to go in here. So I've only drilled these to an 1/8 inch for now, which is what, 2.4 millimeter approximately. And we'll go ahead and drill these out to the actual bolt size later. But I'm just trying to get this all set up here. And now what I want to do is start cutting the tall side of this. And this is supposed to have a curve or an angle to it, and up to the point where the bolt that's supposed to go through to support the arm that's supposed to supports the landing gear. So I did want to show that here on the screen here, so you can kind of see what we're doing. I've installed these 2 angles. That's what I'm working on right now, and then we're supposed to put this little mechanical connection here, linkage here, that's supposed to tie the gear to these angles that I have in place. And you can see how these angles are supposed to be tapered all the way to the end on both sides, but I have to locate where this bolt is supposed to go here, because that's where it's supposed to taper from and to on either side. Now, there's not a lot of dimensions on any of this stuff in the plans. It's kind of pictures of it, but that's it. I know that this arm that's supposed to go in here is supposed to be 91 millimeters wide based on the drawing down here. So I've got 91 millimeters, and the best that I can tell, assuming this is to scale or to, you know, proper drawings, the center of it is supposed to be right at the edge of the seat side, or the side seat support in the fuselage, which is where we're bolting and putting the first bolt in on the end. And of course that means that that center should be 12 millimeters from the end of my angle here is the center of this arm. And then this bolt hole should be from that 12 millimeters in, it should be half of the 91, which is 45 and a half millimeters from here to this center hole here. So that's what I'm going to try and locate that there so that I can start cutting the other sides of this angle here, and then we can go ahead and make this doubler plate that's supposed to go over the top here where that hole is supposed to go. So we'll see if we can get that done. Then I'll worry about making the arm, and then I'll figure out where we need to actually drill through the gear, and I'll have to make sure that I perfectly center that landing gear in between these angles on the fuselage. But yeah, let me go and measure some of this other stuff and see if I can get some of these other parts cut. All right, I was able to cut the taper in these two angles for the landing gear here. I did locate that hole in the right spot, and I just put a large washer around it that basically went to the top of the landing gear here, and just tapered from there down to the end here, and tapered from here back to the other side on both these. So I just stuck them back in here. They look good. I'm just going to keep working on this. I've got to start working on the arm that's supposed to go in here. That's got to be bolted here, and then a bolt is supposed to go through the landing gear here. At first I was questioning whether or not with an aluminum gear I really don't need a bolt that goes all the way through. I could just tap and bolt this into the end here instead of drilling all the way through, but then I got to thinking that if I do that, I don't really have a way of locking those bolts that would go in here unless I try and safety wire those two, which I really don't want to do. Whereas if I do a rod through here that's threaded on either side, I can put a lock nut on either side, and then I don't have to worry about it. So I think I'll just put this in my mill and just drill all the way through it. I got to drill into it anyway, so I might as well go all the way through, and then I don't have to worry about tapping it. But that was an option I thought about. Might be a little bit easier to do if you didn't have a mill to set this into to drill straight through it. You could just tap bolts and put bolts in the end of there, as long as you'd make sure they didn't fall out. So I'm just going to keep moving ahead on this. I want to get this all set up so that this landing gear part is done. And what we are going to work on after that is there's supposed to be an exhaust vent that gets installed here in the forward fuselage. We're just supposed to drill a bunch of holes in here to let air come out, and then there's like an air vent kind of reversed scoop that needs to be installed here. And then there's two intake vents, one here and one on the other side, that flip open and are designed to be open and closed from the inside of the airplane so that you can draw air into the cockpit from the bottom of the fuselage, and then it's supposed to vent back out here in the front. So I do want to get those three intakes and exhaust vents installed on the fuselage before I flip it back over and start attaching the rear fuselage, because I want to limit how much I'm going to have to flip this back over and work on the underside of the airplane. And as long as I have the landing gear basically done and these angles bolted in place, I can get to all this from underneath the airplane without flipping it over, and I don't have to do any fabrication work. And then as long as I get these vents in here, I should be good, or at least I'm comfortable at that point attaching the rear fuselage. I was able to cut out these dog bone parts for the landing gear. Now I'm running into some issues with how to attach these, not only to the brackets here that are supported by the fuselage, but also these to the landing gear itself. And of course the purpose of these is they're supposed to get attached in between here. It's supposed to be bolted to the bracket on one end. The other end is supposed to be attached to the landing gear with a bolt that goes all the way through. And there's supposed to be one of these on each side. And what it allows the landing gear to do is to flex this way up and down, but not allow the landing gear to move side to side. So it complements the loads that are being handled by these brackets here, in that these brackets are designed to only handle vertical loads. So the vertical impact has to be straight up and down on these with the force going into the side of the fuselage. But if we didn't put some other mechanism in here, what would happen is on landing, if this tire got hit on the side or anything, this gear would sway over and these brackets would hit the side of the fuselage. So we're installing this kind of cool mechanism here to fix the landing gear so it will not allow it to move side to side this way, and then these brackets take all the load vertically when you land, and the pivoting of the landing gear here along with the pivoting of this bracket here allows the gear to be completely flexible but be locked in position vertically and locked in position horizontally. This method of doing this, I've never seen this on any other airplane, and it's quite ingenious of how we're actually controlling the loads here with the gear. But I'm having issues with the bolts and stuff that needs to hold all of this together for a couple different reasons. These are supposed to be able to just pivot freely on a steel bushing that we're supposed to create that fits inside of a hole here that's supposed to be, in this case, because we're using imperial, not metric, should be a quarter inch bushing. But inside of that quarter-inch bushing, we need a bolt that goes through that holds it onto the bracket here, and then we need a bolt that goes all the way through the landing gear, comes out the other side, and bolts to the other dog bone bracket that's on the other side. And so we have to have a bushing that is a quarter inch on the outside, but then fits the bolt that goes through on the inside. We also need a bolt that is over 3 inches long. I think it's like 3 1/4 inches long that goes through the landing gear. And the recommended size for these bolts is a number 8 bolt, which correlates to a number 4 or 4 millimeter bolt. The problem is with the strength of the hardware that we can find and buy, and the size of the bolt, and the size of the bushing. So let me just grab this over here. Hold on. So I've got this steel tube. Now this is a steel tube that I bought to make the handles for the main wing attach pins. You know, the big pins, the 5/8 pins that go through and hold the wing spars in place. This material is supposed to be used, welded in, and bent to make a handle. But I also use this same material for the upper nose gear mount for that bushing assembly that required a bolt going through it. And if you watch that video, you'll notice that that was also supposed to be a number 8 bolt that was supposed to, again, be, a 2.5 inches long, needed a steel bushing around it. And what I did is I upgraded that bolt on the upper nose gear mount to a number 10, which is the next size up from number 8, so that it would fit perfectly inside of this quarter-inch tube. And what I'm thinking about doing is taking all the number 8 hardware on the mounts for the dog bones here and just increasing it to a number 10. The benefits of that is that I can use this steel tube, which fits inside a number 10, and on the outside is a quarter inch, which is what is required for these dog bones. If I had to go with a number 8 inside of here, I'd have to find either a thicker wall tube, or I'd have to machine something on my lathe out of a solid piece of 4130. It's a lot more work, and I'm not sure it makes sense. And again, the reason why I'm thinking about upgrading this hardware to a number 10 is that the bolt that goes through here, or this rod that is, or this, they call it a pin. It's a pin that's supposed to go through here, and what it's really supposed to be is a solid pin that has threads on each end that we can put a nut on to be able to attach these to our bushing assembly that's surrounded by washers, so that this can freely rotate on this bolt that's tight and got nuts on the end of it that goes through there. The problem is what do we make this pin out of? That's been my dilemma, and my biggest issue is that the pin that's supposed to go through here is supposed to be 3 1/4 inches long, but not only that, it's supposed to be 160,000 psi tensile strength in a number 8 size bolt or pin size. And the problem with that is I can't find a number 8 bolt that will fit in here that's 3 1/4 inches long. I just can't find anything that's in aircraft hardware that is that long and that small of a diameter. And the other issue is that obviously ANN hardware, I believe, starts at 125,000 psi on up, and MS hardware, I believe, is up to 160,000 psi. So the requirement for this to be 160,000 psi means that I really need an MS bolt, which I can't find one, again, that's a number 8 that is that long. So my only other option then is to try and make something. So I could get some solid pin material, some alloy material, maybe 4130, and I could just put threads on either end of it with my lathe. The problem there is that 4130 is only around 90,000 psi tensile strength, at least from what I've been able to gather, which isn't strong enough in a number 8 size. Now, if I go up to a number 10 size, that will allow me to actually purchase an A&N bolt of 3 1/4 or even longer sizes. The number 10s come in all, I mean, I think it's up to 5-6 inches you can get these bolts, which is crazy. But if I go up to a number 10, then I can get not only it to fit the bushing size, I can buy an actual bolt that'll fit in here properly, that I can get an aircraft nut on one side of it and be able to then set this up in a configuration that I think is going to work and be strong enough. Obviously, the side loads on here, depending on how bad your landing is, could be significant. And so I think going with anything less strong than what's recommended in the manual is probably not a good option. It's probably going to potentially bend that pin that goes through here, which is going to make it fairly difficult to get back out. Now, the only drawback of obviously going to a number 10 size is that we're going to have to drill a bigger hole all the way through the landing gear, which potentially can weaken the landing gear. I don't think going from a number 8 to a number 10 in my situation here with the aluminum landing gear, which is super stiff already, and the fact that this landing gear is actually thicker than the 5/8 that it was really supposed to be. I think, instead of it being 0.625, I think it's 0.645. So I even have another 20 thousandths of thickness out of this to spare if you assume, a number 8 bolt going into 5/8 versus a number 10 bolt going to an oversized or thicker than 5/8 landing gear. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I haven't been able to figure out any better solution that's easier for what I need, is to get the correct hardware that goes in here. And even if I use an A&M bolt that's only 125,000 PSI, let's say, at least it's a larger size, a number 10, so theoretically it's stronger anyway, even though the tensile strength is lower. The overall ability of that bolt to handle the loads here is probably even higher than the 160,000 PSI equivalent number 8 bolt. So that's what I'm going to end up doing here. And like I said, I've already got the bushing material, which will work great. It's nice because I already have this material being used on the handles for the pins, the upper mount for the nose gear, and now I'm going to go ahead and use it for the bushings that I need here, which is standardizing some of these materials a little bit better, and then making it so we can, again, like I always like to do, is get actual aircraft hardware where we can. So I'm going to go ahead and get these drilled out to the 1/4 inch size that is going to fit these bushings. I'm going to get these bushings cut and fit into here. Obviously the bushing needs to be a little bit wider than this dog bone assembly here, so that when we put washers on either side and or clamp it with a bolt and a nut on either side, that this is free to swing on top of this bushing material. I'm going to go ahead and work on that right now. I don't have the actual bolts that I need to bolt all this together, so I'm just going to kind of use temporary hardware for now, just like I bought for these brackets here that get mounted into the fuselage. These are supposed to get number 6 screws, which are actually quite tiny. This is a number 6. I'm going to go ahead and get aircraft hardware in a number 6 screw that I can use to actually attach these to the fuselage. But I'm just going to get the whole configuration of this set up, make sure I get the landing gear centered, and I'm going to go ahead and drill this hole here for this pin that's going to go through for the bolt that holds these brackets in place. So I got pretty far on one of these brackets for the landing gear here. So I finished cutting the bushing that goes down in between the washers that are on either side of this dog bone here. I've got one of them here, and you can see the steel bushing that's there. With a washer on the one side, that bushing will push inside of there, like so. And because that bushing is about 0.3 of a millimeter wider than this aluminum dog bone here, when I put a washer on either side and clamp it together, the bushing inside there won't turn at all, but obviously the aluminum bracket here that's on the outside will twist on that. So I've got this one installed. Now there's a doubler that's supposed to go over the top of this angle here, and you can see the one I have over there. I just made these by hand, just to the contour of the aluminum here. I just drew it out and just on my sander just sanded it to the approximate shape. There is supposed to be 3 rivets that hold that together. There's supposed to be one here, 1/8 inch rivets, and one in the front here. They all get inserted from the back side. So this one on the front has to be countersunk so that this dog bone assembly here can get past it and won't hit the rivet head. But now you can see what's supposed to happen here is this is supposed to attach to a bolt that goes through the landing gear here. There's supposed to be another bushing that I have to install in here, and also a spacer that has to go between that part and the landing gear where it bolts through. But once we get that installed on either side, that's what locks this landing gear to prevent it from moving side to side. So I'm just going to keep working on this and try and get the other side done. Like I said, I've got this part ready, so it's just a matter of drilling out the holes here, get this plate installed with the holes in there, and I'll get it set up exactly like this. And then we should be able to center the landing gear on the fuselage and go ahead and mark where we're going to drill through the landing gear leg here for the 10mm bolt that's going to go through and attach the two sides of this assembly together. Well, I put a board between the tops of the landing gear here and made some marks and found the center of that board, and then with a square marked and found the center of the landing gear leg here. I then went back and measured from the side of this bracket here to the center, side of the bracket here to the center, and then just loosened these four top bolts and went ahead and just moved and positioned this landing gear so it's perfectly centered between the two right and left landing gear clamps. I do have both of these side supports here all put in with temporary sheet metal fasteners, but what I'm concerned about is I have to make sure that these are centered side to side. In other words, there can't be any misalignment here. The other concern is, how do I drill through this 2-inch wide aluminum landing gear straight through without this bit wanting to wander around? And so I'm just trying to figure out exactly the best way to do this. I did go ahead and mark the center of one of these dog bone assemblies that's going to attach to here, and then ran a square across with a line to the other side, and then tried to line this one up with the center of it. They are very, very close. They're maybe a 1/4 millimeter off. I'm not exactly sure. They're off just a tiny bit. And part of that is just because the alignment of this might have been slightly different when I drilled the holes. These assemblies were matched when I made them, but when I installed them on the bottom and drilled the holes through, of course there can be some slight movement. Now, I have not opened up these holes to their final size. Right now they're 1/8 inch and they need to be a number 6. The number 6 is very close to an 1/8 inch, so I don't have a lot of movement that I can do there, but I am concerned that if I don't get this pin aligned or this pin gets off, then all of a sudden these are not going to fit on either side, even more maybe off than they are right now. So I am thinking of actually drilling through each side and hoping that they meet in the middle, or at least doing it with a small enough drill bit that if they don't quite meet in the middle, that when I run through with a slightly larger drill bit, that it will align the two ends just to make sure that the hole on either end ends up exactly where I need it to be, which is at the center of this, where this needs to be bolted together. So I'm going to play around with this a little bit more, but I'm going to try and drill this right away, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get done and see how close we actually end up getting. Well, I decided to cut the bushings that go inside the front part of these brackets that we're attaching here, and I went ahead and put the bolts in. And what I was trying to do is just check the alignment of the bolts to the line that's there. Now, obviously, it's not going to be right in the center because these are rotated up above the center line. But what I'm really looking to see is, are these spaced the same distance away from that line? And I mean, it's so close, it's hard to even tell with the eye that it's off. I could say that this one's probably a little bit more outward to the outside of the aircraft compared to the other one, but it is so close, I'm not sure that it matters. And then I also put a straight edge here on the end of the brackets here, and I did measure between the bushing and the end of the bracket. They are exactly the same, to the 100th of a millimeter. So if I put this out here, I can actually flip these away and then measure from this straight edge here back to the line just to see if there is any difference between the two. Again, visually it's unnoticeable. So I think I'm good, but I am going to go ahead and pull the gear off now and try and drill this hole in. I'm going to drill from each side. I'm not going to try and drill all the way through. I just don't trust that. If it's off, then I'm in real trouble. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on my mill, drill halfway through, flip it over, line up the line on the other side, drill through, and then I'll go ahead and see if I can get all the way through and how far off they are. There's nothing much else I can do. This is just hope for the best. So I'm going to drill this out. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. I was able to drill through the other side halfway through and then drill through this side, and I've got a perfect alignment of the hole from one side to the other. I drilled through with a brand new 3/32 drill bit that I had just to make sure that I could test with something small and then widen it out from there. Now, I did use a dial indicator to level the gear in the mill here, so I was a little bit concerned that you know, I wouldn't be able to get this perfectly flat. Even though my vise is perfectly flat, this is such a big piece in here. So I ended up putting some shims underneath this side to make sure that this was perfectly level all the way across, at least a 6-inch span here. So, but that made it so that I was able to drill through and get a nice hole. I'm going to go ahead and widen this out to the number 10 bolt size. Okay, I've got the gear back on here. I went ahead and made these bushings, or not bushings, they're really just spacers that I stuck in here for either side. That's supposed to make sure that these legs here stay the proper distance out from the leg when this gets bolted and screwed in. Obviously, this isn't going to pivot, it's going to pivot here. These are just 5mm thick aluminum bushings that just have a number 10 hole drilled through them, or a spacer that has a number 10 hole drilled through them. And these bolts are just slipped in here just so I can check the positioning. These are just like 1 inch or 1.25 inch bolts that I have in there. It's just verifying that I have this hole lined up on either side. So what I'm finished with now is the basic structure of the gear is done. The support brackets on this side are done, that side are done. This bracket that prevents the gear from moving right to left is complete. Now it's just getting all the right hardware and making sure I clean up everything, get the rivets that need to go in these doubler plates, go ahead and order the long bolt that I need to hold this together. You know, we've got some finishing that needs to be done and clean up on these brackets. I've got to paint these steel brackets here, clean them up. So I've just got all cleanup stuff to do, but at least the structure of this is all fit, and it's just a matter of finishing the little details. So I'm going to quit for today, but I'm going to go ahead and get all the correct hardware ordered that I need now that I know everything that I need to finish this, and we'll start taking this back apart and cleaning everything up. So the landing gear support parts here, I went ahead and cleaned these up and allodyne them. I installed solid rivets in these to hold these brackets in place. They're supposed to have just pop rivets in there, but I thought it would be better just to use solid rivets. It was easy to use the rivet squeezer on those to get those installed. I went ahead and allodyned these small parts for the landing gear. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall these and get the landing gear reinstalled on the bottom of the airplane. And I'm going to start working on the cover that goes over the top. There's supposed to be a sheet metal cover that goes over the top of the landing gear. I want to start figuring out exactly where that's going to attach on the front and the back, because I'm probably going to spray the underside in that area that's going to be covered by that cover with some primer. We also have to figure out how to do some foam supports that need to go underneath there around these fuselage components, or I'm sorry, around these landing gear components. So I'm going to start working on that next. So I spent some time just putting the bevels on the edges of these landing gear brackets. So the plans recommend a 45-degree 3mm bevel on the bottom, a 30-degree 2mm bevel across the top. And some of the other people who have recently been working on CriCris have actually rounded these completely off so that you have a nice smooth curve here, smooth here, and then actually smooth around the spot where the landing gear bolt goes through. So what I did is I actually put a washer on top of here with it's actually a 3/4 inch washer, and I just scribed a mark around the outside here, and then I did bevel the corners here down to pretty close to that line, so I can then start working on actually completely just rounding off these edges, and these can come out nice and smooth and looking really pretty. They're kind of nice right now, but I think I am going to go ahead and keep polishing these up and just continue to round the edges and get these into a very smooth looking complete assembly. I think it'll look the nicest, plus it makes it, I guess, extra aerodynamic. These do actually hang out from the bottom of the airplane, so they don't get covered really. And so I guess having them as smooth as possible would be beneficial. So I've gone ahead and primed and painted these metal brackets, the steel brackets that are attaching the clamps for the landing gear. I went ahead and bolted these in. I basically bolted these in permanently. I've put the lock washers on the lock nuts on the back. I did strip out one of the screws on the other side where I stripped the head out with the Phillips bit. I noticed that some of these metal lock washers tend to be a little bit tighter than others depending on how they're bent, because they're just there's little tiny washers or little tiny nuts here that they basically make these in kind of a crimped configuration so that they pinch the screw when you put them back or put them on. And I ended up with one on the other side that was really tight, and the screwdriver slipped, and I stripped one of the screws. So I'm gonna have to replace that screw. But the other thing I noticed too is that the wrench that you need for this doesn't really fit on it when it's misshapen when it's new. Before you put it on there, you can't really get your wrench in. You can get an open end wrench. Let me see if I can find the one I was using here. All right. So this is the 7/32 wrench that I was using for these tiny little nuts. But you can get the open end on it, and so the best course of action is to use the open end on it to get it started. Then once you get it started, it kind of gets its shape back, and then you can fit it in the box end, which it doesn't fit in right now. But I noticed that some of these were even so tight that it was stretching the end of the wrench here. So if I was using this end the whole time, it would actually this would actually start to pop the wrench apart, and it would start skipping the edges of the nut. So just these were really tedious to get installed, but I was able to get them all in. They all fit well. I've got my landing gear brackets in. I did do some final just kind of sanding and shaping on these on the ends. I'm just going to leave them like this. They look nice enough to me. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead. Oh, you can also see up here I did prime the top here underneath, right where the angle brackets are going to go that mount the side-to-side supports for the landing gear. I did that just so that, again, I can come back later and prime behind here and in front of here where that cover goes over, but I didn't want to have to disassemble the landing gear again after I get it on this time. This is kind of my final assembly with the landing gear moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and get the landing gear back in the clamps here, and I'm going to go ahead and put the angles back on the top here and get these holes final drilled and get the number 6 screws and nuts that need to go into these holes in place so that I can basically say the landing gear is done. Obviously I'll have to go back and inspect things before I start flight testing, but I do want to have the landing gear basically completed at this point so that when I get it on its wheels I don't have to take it back off again. So let me go ahead and get the landing gear back on here, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. All right, I'm making some headway on getting this landing gear installed permanently. I keep running into hardware issues here that are kind of driving me crazy. So I purchased screws to install these supports in here for the landing gear, and the primary reason I did that is it's very difficult to find bolts that are smaller than a number 10, and of course these are number 6. These are tiny. These are the NAS I think 1801s that I've purchased and used before. These are number 8. You can get these in number 6, number 4. I mean, they get tiny, and what's nice about these is that they do have a head on them that you can get a socket onto, but you can also use a screwdriver if needed. I'm not sure why I didn't buy, well, I do know why I didn't buy these. So I should have bought these in a number 6 to use to install this, and instead I bought screws in a number 6 because Aircraft Spruce does not carry this size in anything smaller than a number 8, although these do come in a number 6 and smaller size. And so I just thought, well, I'm going to get this stuff from Aircraft Spruce. I'm just going to use screws, no big deal, right? Well, I'm running into problems with the fact that these jet nuts, this is number 6, number 8, and number 10. These jet nuts are so tight that it's very difficult to keep a screwdriver engaged in these screws as you tighten the nut. As I said, on these even these screws that I did on the side here, I stripped one on the other side, not the threads, but the head, because I just couldn't hold on to it tight enough as I was trying to put on this number 8 jet nut. And some of these jet nuts are a little bit tighter than other ones. And so, but I'm not sure I would have used anything else here other than these washer head screws, because I like the fact that on the side here that we've got a big surface of screw to be able to support the sides of these steel brackets. If I had used, you know, something like this, has a much smaller head on it, and I would have had to have used a washer under there, which would have been fine, but I think this is better than this with a washer. But the problem I've already had just trying to get these in place, I've had 2 issues. One is I snapped one of the heads completely off. I tightened it, and I just tightened it a little bit too much, and it just broke. And so I got to get another screw. Of course, I've been ordering hardware just at the exact quantity I've needed. I haven't expected that I would strip out any screws or snap any off. But the other issue I'm having here is these angles, which are 16th inch angles that I'm using here for the landing gear support, have a huge radius on the inside. It's the same issue that we had doing the wing spars, where this screw is actually not sitting flat. I think you can see it's sitting up and there's a gap underneath it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this back off. I'm going to take it over to my mill, and I'm going to center each one of these holes, and I'm going to use the same size mill or slightly larger than what the head size is on these screws, and just mill a flat spot over the top of each one of these holes so I can get these screws to sit flat. I really don't want them sitting with a gap underneath. It doesn't seem to want to pull this flat on the bottom of the fuselage either. So anyway, I'm just going to keep working on this. I'm trying to get this. I'm waiting for bolts, because Aircraft Spruce is even short on hardware now. There's shortages of everything right now, rivets and everything else. But I'm missing the correct size screws for these, so I'm not going to permanently install these at this point, but I can always unbolt them here and lift the landing gear, pull these bolts out and replace them when they get in. But I am trying to get these angles permanently attached to the bottom of the fuselage. Now, the other thing I want to say too, though, is the seat. So these screws in the back here end up going through, and they just barely miss the flat part of the seat bottom. In fact, this is the seat bottom here, and I think you can see when I drilled through, I hit right there a little spot, and I hit right here a little spot. So they're just, this is the flat part that sits on the bottom of the fuselage. These are just past the edge of the bend here. I'm going to have to cut off the top of those screws just above the top of the nut to make it so that this seat pan doesn't hit those screws that are going through. So watch out for that when you're making this, because if you were to get these screws even closer to that angle, you wouldn't even be able to get a nut on them. So I'm running into a lot of issues, just fit problems, including, you know, the fit problems I had just getting these brackets in. And the one thing I do want to mention is that when you're working on installing these brackets, you can see the rivets here, and you can see your center hole here. That's where this screw is supposed to align with, to make sure that you hit that cutout that's in that wing pin plate that's behind here. I didn't notice that when I was doing this. I just marked everything and drilled it, assumed it was going to work out. But there's a good visual reference here to tell when you're starting to place these before you drill exactly where you are centered on this hole compared to the center of the wing pin. So again, just lots of little things to look out for when you're putting the landing gear together. But anyway, I'm going to keep going here and see if I can get this attached. I do want to get this flipped over. I'm trying to get to the point where I can start finishing the few things I need to do on the rear fuselage and just get the rear fuselage and forward fuselage connected together. I am going to come back here and replace these bolts. This is just hardware store hardware. I do have the correct bolts that are supposed to go in here. In fact, the 2 bolts that I'm temporarily using here are 2 of the bolts that are supposed to hold the nose gear block in the front here. If I get the nose gear block bolted together, I get this bolted together, and I get all the hardware in here, I really shouldn't have to do much underneath the airplane after this, at least on the forward fuselage, except fabricate this vent cover, which I'll do at some point. So anyway, let me keep working on this. I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, I think you can see here how much I had to recess this screw. It's actually about 2/3 up the screw. In fact, if I take it out, you can see that was with a 1/4 inch end mill, just centered on the hole. But yeah, this worked good. I almost have a feeling that the reason I busted off this first screw was because of the angle of the head. When I tightened it down, I think the head just finally broke just because it was being bent. And I had the fuselage right side up, and I was just holding a screwdriver under the bottom and then trying to pay attention to how much I was wrenching from the top. I was trying to not turn the screwdriver and turn the wrench. And I don't think I noticed how much that was bending under there, but I'm gonna keep moving ahead. We'll get these screws installed now.